1 week later, Belu's ears twitched as the messenger relayed the grim news. Decimation in Egypt at the hands of Pharaoh Taharka. Thousands dead, the king himself gravely wounded. It was a crushing defeat. "I told you those ego-driven humans were unprepared," Belu roared before the other dogs. "And now Assyria bleeds because King Esarhaddon discounted his greatest warriors." Fierce barks erupted around the hall. Ears flattened back, claws scraped stone, and even Kalbi's stoic facade slipped into a vengeful snarl. The dogs were furious. "What now, sir?" asked one of the younger mastiffs. "With the army shattered, the kingdom lies vulnerable." Now, Asher Etililani's eyes flashed. "Now we remind the humans why an empire's foundations lie on 4 legs, not 2. The king will soon beg for our aid after this disgrace, and we shall give it to him only on our terms." Kalbi nodded firmly. "Yes, for too long have they marginalized us, forgetting that we have always littered the sands red alongside their ancestors. It's time we retake our place as partners and restore the old ways. No more patrolling like mindless beasts while the men claim glory," spat Belu. "Let us loose and unleash hell upon Assyria's enemies once more." Passionate howls filled the hall. The bitter seeds planted last week had finally borne vengeful fruit. Never again would they heed the commands of weak kings who misunderstood true strength. When the next envoy came pleading for the war dogs' aid, they met him with gnashing teeth and flashing claws. "Tell your king, we shall fight once more alongside his legions," Belu declared, "but as equals under the banner, on our terms. The old covenant between us must be renewed." The envoy trembled. "Yes, of course, I shall inform his grace at once." The royal tent fell silent as King Esarhaddon slumped upon his throne at the head of the hastily erected tent, head in hands. The bandages across his chest did little to hide the severity of his wounds. At the foot of the dais sat the towering war dogs, patiently awaiting the shamed king's words. They could afford to let him feel the full weight of his failure. At last, Esarhaddon spoke. "Utter massacre. The sands are now home to so many good Assyrian soldiers." He clenched his fists. "And now Egypt celebrates while we lick our wounds like whipped cats." The king's grief twisted into rage. "Decades spent building my armies for what? So they could be slaughtered by Pharaoh Taharka's forces?" Esarhaddon spat on the floor. "I will be remembered as the fool who lost Assyria's hard-won territory in but a single battle." Kalbi stepped forward, head bowed respectfully. "Your Grace, though the defeat pains us all, do not despair. Assyria remains mighty, and we loyal hounds stand ready to—" "Silence!" roared Esarhaddon. "Your empty platitudes ring hollow. After I denied your aid and paid such grave cost." He turned his blazing eyes on the dogs. "But no more! You will redeem this disgrace, my 4-legged generals. Speak! How shall we annihilate Taharka and retake Egypt?" Belu and Kalbi exchanged a glance. At long last, their counsel was sought again. "A frontal assault would fail, Your Grace," Belu began. "The Egyptians will expect such foolishness after their easy victory." Esarhaddon grumbled impatiently, but Kalbi raised a calming paw. "Wait, sire. Consider a more subtle approach." For the next hour, the two war dogs outlined their strategy, a meticulous, multi-pronged campaign aimed at systematically crippling Egypt's military's supplies and morale over the next 3 years. Eventually, the halls echoed with Esarhaddon's approving shouts and vengeful laughter as the dogs detailed their ruthless tactics. Finally, the king raised a hand, eyes alight with newfound hope. "Magnificent generals, your guidance shall deliver us victory." He stood, wincing slightly from his wounds. "I hereby grant you joint command of all Assyrian land forces, human and canine. I will not stand between you and your brilliant strategies, and when Egypt's smouldering ruins lie before us, you both shall have honors and riches heaped upon you." Overjoyed yips echoed through the hall, but Belu silenced them with a stern growl. This was not about riches or glory, only their kingdom's future. Satisfied, the warhounds understood the grave responsibility entrusted to them. Esarhaddon relaxed into his throne. "Come, let us feast together and discuss details." He clapped, summoning a procession of servants carrying trays laden with extravagant dishes. Spiced mutton stews, fig cakes drenched in honey, plump dates and exotic fruits piled high along the table. Flagons of rich wine mixed with herbs and elderflower filled cups and drinking bowls. Esarhaddon tore lustily into a haunch of lamb, grease glistening on his beard. Glancing at each other, Belu and Kalbi bowed and took their leave, citing the need to plan. Esarhaddon waved them off dismissively and turned to talk with his human advisors, who were crestfallen and confused by how quickly he had shifted focus from the tragic losses their nation had just incurred. The dogs had departed because they wanted nothing more to do with the king than absolutely necessary. They too were unsettled by what they believed was unhealthy ambition. But despite his catastrophic failures, they were loyal to the crown and their country. They would get to work. The upcoming war would not win itself. Three years of meticulous preparation and execution had finally brought the Assyrian forces to within eyesight of the mighty gates of Memphis. Belu and Kalbi stood proud atop the hill overlooking the ancient Egyptian capital, fellow war dogs and human soldiers awaiting their command. Less than a mile away, in the winding alleys of the Memphis Bazaar, street vendors were already firing up clay ovens, the aroma of baked bread and roasting fowl mingling with the tang of spices carried on desert winds. Palm leaves rustled overhead as donkeys laden with fresh produce passed en route to the market stalls. The dogs waited patiently. By mid-morning, the city was alive with activity. Splashes and laughter rang from the bathing steps lining the Nile, where children leapt from stone-paved docks into the water with splashes that caught and trapped the sun. On the nearby embankment, teams of Nubian laborers grunted rhythmic work songs as they hauled massive granite blocks, gleaming wet and golden in the sun. The bustling capital sprawled, magnificent and eternal, along the western banks of the Nile. Limestone temples glowed luminous white beneath the desert sun. Intricate hieroglyphs and statues of pharaohs past standing sentry. Obelisks pierced the azure sky, their golden tips reflecting light. Crowds of merchants, priests, and artisans throbbed through the maze-like streets. The very air thrummed with chatter and haggling in a dozen dialects interwoven with aromatic spices, fresh Nile fish, and sweet dates imported from upriver farms. Still, the dogs waited. Past the markets, labourers dragged immense blocks down the river from quarries to construct the newest monuments and shrines, driven by the crack of overseers' whips. At the city's vibrant core sprawled the old kingdom palace, its sandstone walls towering stern and elegant. Within dwelled the current pharaoh, seated on the peacock throne. From here, the god-king's decrees rippled outward, ensuring ma'at and order flowed smoothly throughout his domain. In the artisan district, artful hands spun flax into linen, chiseled alabaster vases, and blended vivid azure dyes for decorating papyrus scrolls. The pharaoh's master builders perused tablets of architectural plans, preparing to add to Memphis's already grand monuments. In a display of sheer discipline and self-control, much to the dismay of the impatient armies that waited for their signal, Kalbi and Belu continued to wait until the moment was right. They watched, they listened, and they smelled the scents of the kingdom that lay before them. Dusk began to fall. Fragrant wood smoke and sizzling meats scented the cooling air. After the day's toil, weary citizens gathered in open-air taverns to enjoy companionship and entertainment. Lyric poets, dancers, and monkey shows delighting spirited crowds. Lotus flowers folded their petals as Memphis began slumbering beneath the blanket of nut, the air finally stilling from the day's commotion. Nearby, the immense pylons and statues of pharaohs past stood watch, stern guardians protecting the city's artifacts. Neither Kalbi nor Belu spoke. They did not stretch, they did not take breaks, and they did not eat or drink. They watched. Finally, as the sun set gold on the western horizon and the Nile turned from cobalt to inky black, they turned and looked at one another. Kalbi nodded. It was time. Belu growled in agreement. The novel and serialized audiobook Hounds of War is written and produced by James Eldridge. It is a work of fiction. However, in the early months of 671 BC, Esarhaddon again marched against Egypt. The army assembled for this second Egyptian campaign was considerably larger than the one Esarhaddon had used in 673 BC, and he marched at a much slower speed in order to avoid the problems that had plagued his previous attempt. On his way, he passed through Haran, one of the major cities in the western parts of his empire. Here, a prophecy was revealed to the king, which predicted that Esarhaddon's conquest of Egypt would be a successful one. To see images from this story or purchase the book in hardcover or Kindle versions, visit houndsofwarbook.com.